I'm Hannah Brooks. I'm 28 years old, and there are moments in life that tattoo themselves onto your memory so deeply that even years later you can't scrub them out. For me, it was the day my body betrayed me, the day I fell and everything below my waist turned silent, as if a switch had been flipped off forever. I can still see my brother Dylan standing over me with that smirk he always wore when he thought he was clever, laughing like it was all some kind of harmless prank, while I lay on the cold concrete, staring up at the blue sky that suddenly felt a million miles away. My father Charles barked at me to quit acting like a baby and walk it off. My mother Linda hissed that I was ruining Dylan's birthday party, and in that moment I realized that my pain meant nothing to the very people who were supposed to love me most. They didn't know it yet, but their indifference that day would become their undoing. Growing up in the Brooks household in Seattle looked perfect from the outside. We had a nice colonial house in a quiet neighborhood lined with cherry blossoms, a father who wore his pressed suits to work as an accountant downtown, a mother who baked cookies for church events, and two children who on paper looked like they were destined for success. But behind closed doors, I walked on eggshells. The smell of lemon polish and my mother's lavender perfume couldn't cover the tension that crackled through the walls like static. My father was 6'2" of unbending stoicism, a man who thought tears were a disease and tenderness a weakness. His own father had been military, the kind of man who taught him that pain was simply weakness leaving the body, and my dad carried that lesson into every corner of our home. He never let me forget it either. No matter if it was a skinned knee, the flu, or a broken heart at 16, the answer was always the same. Toughen up, Hannah. He said it so often it might as well have been stitched into the wallpaper. And my mother, well, Linda didn't lift me up either. She had these occasional flashes of softness, an extra cookie slipped onto my plate, a hand smoothed across my hair when she thought no one was looking. But the truth was, she lived her whole life orbiting around my father and my brother Dylan. She was anxious, always afraid of upsetting the balance, always choosing denial if it meant keeping appearances polished. And when I cried out for recognition, she'd cut me with words sharper than knives. Your brother would never complain like that. Those words burrowed deeper into me than any wound on my body ever did. And then there was Dylan, 3 years older, forever the golden child. By now he's 31, but even as a boy he knew exactly how to work the system. He was athletic, charming in that smooth way that makes teachers grin and neighbors gush, but underneath he was manipulative and cruel. He learned early that as long as he kept up his perfect front for our parents, he could do whatever he wanted to me. When I was 7 and he was 10, he shoved me hard off my bike on the hill near our house, and I remember the scream in my wrist as it snapped, the gravel grinding into my knees, and the way he stood there with wide eyes that quickly shifted into a practiced innocence. He told my parents I was clumsy, that I just fell, and of course they believed him without a question. I sat in the ER with a cast being fitted, while my father lectured me about being more careful, and my mother worried aloud about the medical bills. Not once did they consider that Dylan might have lied. That was my childhood in a nutshell, me bleeding and broken, and them choosing not to see it. Looking back now, it almost feels absurd how easily my parents swallowed every lie Dylan fed them. When I broke my wrist after he shoved me off that bike, I sat there with tears streaking my face, insisting he pushed me, but he just shrugged and told them I'd tripped because I was clumsy. And they nodded along like it made perfect sense. At the hospital, while a nurse wrapped my arm in plaster, my dad leaned over and scolded me about being more careful, as though a 7-year-old girl could have controlled gravity. My mother sat in the corner sighing about bills, wringing her hands over money instead of the fact that her daughter's arm was broken. It was like the truth evaporated the moment Dylan opened his mouth, and all that was left was their blind faith in him and their disappointment in me. That pattern carried through every year of my life. When I was 12 and he locked me in the basement during a thunderstorm, knowing I was terrified of the dark, knowing how the creaks of that old house turned into monsters in my imagination, I pounded on the door until my throat was raw. Hours later, when I escaped, my parents told me I was making things up to get attention. At 16, I spent weeks building my science project, an elaborate model of the solar system, and the night before it was due, Dylan snuck in and snapped the strings so the planets dangled like broken ornaments. I cried over the ruins of my project, and when I told my parents, they said it was my fault for waiting too long to prepare. Not once did they even entertain the thought that their golden boy might have deliberately ruined my work. The lesson was clear. In my house, my brother was untouchable, and I was the problem. By the time I turned 18, I was suffocating. So I packed up, left for college out of state, and told myself I'd finally escaped the gravitational pull of that family. I studied to become an elementary school teacher because I wanted to give kids the kind of safety and encouragement I'd never known at home. I built a little life for myself, friends who called to check in on me, co-workers who noticed when I was struggling, and a therapist who patiently helped me peel back the layers of damage from my childhood. And yet, no matter how far I moved, the guilt strings tugged. Holidays, birthdays, those endless calls from my mother. They pulled me back into orbit, reminding me that blood ties can feel like chains. So when my mother called one evening and insisted I come to Dylan's 31st birthday party, I felt that familiar pressure settle in. It had been 6 months since I'd seen any of them, and a small, naive part of me thought maybe distance had softened the sharp edges of our relationship. Maybe things would be different. "It would mean so much to your brother," she said, though I knew in my bones Dylan wouldn't care if I showed up or not. She mentioned a backyard barbecue, how my dad was proud of the new pool deck he'd just built, how everyone would be there. By everyone, she meant Dylan's friends, the same obnoxious, smirking men who used to laugh when he humiliated me. The idea of spending an afternoon surrounded by them made my stomach churn. But I had no excuses left, so I said fine. And then came her parting shot, the one she knew would sting. "Dress nicely." You know how important appearances are to your father. She knew I'd stopped trying to fit their preppy mold, choosing comfort over costumes, and she couldn't resist reminding me that even my clothing was a disappointment. I hung up and sat in the silence of my apartment, trying to breathe through the knot in my chest. I promised myself I'd survive it the way I always had. Go, smile politely, hand Dylan a card with some cash tucked inside, and leave as soon as I could slip away without causing another storm. But deep down, I already knew, I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, that this wasn't going to be just another awkward family gathering. Something was coming. I just didn't know yet that it would change everything about my body, my family, and my life forever. I told myself I could survive one afternoon of forced smiles and shallow conversation if it meant I'd earn a few quiet months away from the chaos that was my family. What I didn't realize then was that this party would mark the last time I would ever stand on my own 2 feet without help. The cruelty that had been simmering for years, disguised as jokes and shrugged off as harmless, was about to boil over in a way that would change me forever. My parents' talent for ignoring my pain, their endless chorus of "you're exaggerating, you're being dramatic," was about to turn from emotional neglect into something that could never again be brushed aside. I packed a small overnight bag, but not because I planned to sleep under their roof. I booked a cheap room at a hotel off the freeway, just far enough away to remind myself I had options. Even that tiny act felt like rebellion, proof that I wasn't their little girl under control anymore. I picked out clothes carefully that morning, dark jeans, a blue blouse, comfortable flats. Nothing flashy, nothing casual enough to give my father Charles another excuse to comment on how I dressed, but also not so formal that I'd feel like I was slipping back into the old costume of their approval. My therapist's voice echoed in my head as I zipped the bag. Breathe, visualize, remind yourself you can always leave. I repeated it like a mantra on the 2-hour drive north from my apartment in Seattle, hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than I meant to. But mantras and breathing exercises can only take you so far. There's no script that prepares you for betrayal happening in real time. I pulled into their driveway exactly at 2 in the afternoon, a deliberate calculation. If I arrived right at the start, I could fade into the crowd rather than be cornered in the kitchen with the usual questions about my life. Questions they never actually wanted answers to. Even before I parked, I saw the lineup of vehicles: SUVs, tricked-out trucks, and the unmistakable flash of red belonging to Dylan's best friend, Tyler's Corvette. Tyler, who had once locked me out of my own house during a sleepover, laughing while Dylan told everyone I cried like a baby in the rain. The sight of that car alone sent a ripple of dread through me. When I rang the bell, my mother Linda greeted me with her trademark combination of politeness and quiet disapproval. She leaned in for an air kiss that never quite touched skin, and her eyes scanned my outfit like a TSA agent looking for contraband. She smiled, thin and satisfied, as though I had just barely cleared the bar she set. "Hannah, you made it," she said, before steering me toward the backyard without another word. She mentioned casually that Dylan had already opened his gifts, and that was her way of reminding me. My presence was optional, an afterthought, tolerated at best. The living room was littered with torn wrapping paper and ribbon, a shrine to my brother's entitlement. I saw a gleaming set of golf clubs propped against the couch, some designer clothes draped carelessly over a chair, and a small velvet box that looked suspiciously like it belonged in a jewelry store display. Then there was the photograph of a jet ski perched on top of one of the larger boxes. "Your father is having it delivered next week," Linda announced proudly, as if she and Charles had just secured Dylan a new piece of his kingdom. My stomach knotted. Just 6 months earlier, for my 30th birthday, I got a department store gift card mailed in an envelope without even a handwritten note. The inequity stung like salt rubbed into an old wound, a reminder that no matter what I did, I would never be their golden child. The sting of that familiar disparity sat heavy in my chest, but I pasted on a polite smile as I set my modest card with $200 on the gift table, swallowed up by the mountain of extravagant boxes. Following my mother through the sliding doors, I stepped into the backyard and felt the air thick with smoke from the grill, laughter rising in waves from the pool deck. It was exactly what I expected. 30 or so men clustered in loose circles, bottles of beer sweating in their hands, voices pitched too loud, the air carrying that particular blend of testosterone and arrogance. My father, Charles, stood at the grill like a general commanding a battlefield, flipping steaks with mechanical precision, his shirt tucked in, his jaw set, the picture of suburban authority. And there was Dylan, the center of gravity as always, sprawled in his glory with his entourage, a beer dangling from one hand as he gestured wildly with the other, spinning some tall tale about himself. Even from a distance, I could see how time had caught up with him, his once-cut frame softened by booze and late nights, but the arrogance on his face hadn't aged a day. When his eyes landed on me, I knew I was trapped. He peeled himself away from his pack and came toward me with the exaggerated warmth of a salesman greeting a client he barely remembers. "Little sis," he said, dragging out the words with mock affection, pulling me into a hug that was more like a headlock, the pressure of his arms a reminder of who had always been stronger, louder, and favored. I pulled back quickly, steadying myself with a flat, "Happy birthday, Dylan." He gestured at the sprawling deck, the in-ground pool glinting in the sun, his voice swelling with pride as he bragged about the Brazilian hardwood, the $20,000 price tag, how Dad had spared no expense. He didn't need to say the rest out loud. I'd lived it my whole life. His luxuries were investments. My needs were inconveniences. I slipped away under the pretense of getting a drink and made a beeline for the cooler, choosing water over alcohol. I'd learned long ago that I couldn't afford to dull my edges around them. Too easy to get cornered, too easy to be made the punchline of the evening. For about an hour, I floated around the edges, chatting with a few of the girlfriends and wives who looked as out of place as I felt. We formed this unspoken alliance of outsiders, whispering polite things while watching the boys grow louder, sloppier, drunker. The air turned sour with the smell of spilled beer, sweat, and chlorine, and I felt the familiar itch to leave creeping up my spine. But the thing about Dylan was, he couldn't leave me alone. He needed an audience, and he needed a target. Eventually, his voice cut across the chatter, calling my name like a spotlight. "Hey, remember when we convinced Hannah the neighbor's Labrador had rabies?" His words were slurred but clear enough, and suddenly 30 pairs of eyes were on me. She was so scared she wouldn't go outside for a week. Laughter rippled through the crowd, that cruel, giddy laughter that had followed me my whole childhood. I felt my face burn, not just from the humiliation, but from the betrayal of memory. 7 years old again, clutching the porch railing, terrified of a sweet old dog that never hurt anyone, while Dylan and his friends howled with delight. And here we were, decades later, him still dining out on my fear, the crowd still entertained by my pain. The laughter that followed Dylan's story cut into me like glass, and when Tyler chimed in about the shampoo prank, how they'd switched mine with hair removal cream when I was 14, I felt my scalp tingle with the phantom memory of hair falling out in clumps, the shame of pulling on baseball caps before school so no one would see the bald patches. They roared with laughter, as though the cruelty of teenage boys was something noble to reminisce about. My cheeks burned hot, and I wanted to crawl out of my own skin. I remembered the look on my mother Linda's face when it happened back then, how she barely glanced at me and muttered I was being dramatic, how my father Charles told me to toughen up. No one had defended me then, and no one was defending me now. I took a long breath, willing myself to stay calm, and quietly started gathering my things. I had reached the breaking point. No performance of family loyalty was worth letting them strip me bare like that again. I thought if I just slipped away, grab my purse, wave a quick goodbye, get in my car, I might salvage what little dignity I had left. But Dylan, drunk and unpredictable, always seemed to know when I was about to slip free. He stumbled into my path, his beer sloshing dangerously close to my shoes, his words thick and slurred. "Leaving so soon?" "The party's just getting started." His grin was wide but hollow, his eyes glassy. I told him I had a long drive back, tried to step around, but he moved with surprising precision for someone that intoxicated, blocking me like a bouncer at a bar. "Come on, sis, loosen up," he pressed, thrusting a cup toward me. "Have a drink with us, for old time's sake." I knew exactly what that meant, a staged camaraderie, followed by some cruel spectacle at my expense. I'd played that part too many times before, and I wasn't about to, again. "No thanks, Dylan. I really need to go." My voice was steady, but my heart was pounding. His smile dropped like a mask, slipping off stage, the hardness underneath flashing out. Still the same uptight Hannah. Some things never change. The contempt in his tone sent a chill through me, but I turned away, forcing myself toward the sliding door, toward freedom. My purse was waiting inside, just a few more steps, and I could leave this entire poisonous atmosphere behind. But fate, or more likely Dylan's malice, had other plans. To reach the door, I had to cross a section of the brand new pool deck, the one he'd been bragging about all afternoon. The moment my foot touched the wood, something felt off. It was slick in a way that didn't make sense. My flat slid forward, my body tilting, arms pinwheeling as panic surged through me. In a split second, I caught the faint sheen on the boards, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. A realization struck, cold and brutal. This wasn't an accident. But by the time I knew, it was too late. My other foot shot out from under me, and the world tilted backward. Everything slowed, as though the universe wanted me to witness the cruelty in full. I saw Dylan and his pack watching, their faces twisted in something between anticipation and amusement. I saw my father glance up from the grill, irritation flickering across his face, and my mother pausing mid-sentence, her lips pursed. And then came the impact. Not on the deck, like I'd braced for, but against the hard concrete lip of the pool. My lower back and head struck at once, and the shock ripped through me like lightning, snapping my body into a silence I'd never known before. The crack of my lower back and skull hitting at the same time felt like the universe split me in two, a blinding explosion of pain that ripped up my spine and burst behind my eyes in white-hot fireworks. I remember a scream tearing through the air and thinking for half a second that it belonged to someone else, before realizing, with horror, that it came from me. The world spun violently, colors bleeding together, my stomach rolling as though gravity itself had been knocked sideways. When the haze finally steadied, I found myself staring at a perfect blue Seattle sky, as though nothing in the world had changed, except that everything had. My head throbbed like it was caving in, but worse than the pain was the absence. My legs, my hips, my whole lower body had gone silent. No sensation, no movement, just a void where life had always been. "Help!" I gasped, my voice so faint I could barely hear it myself. The fall had punched the breath out of me, my chest fighting to draw air. "Please, help me, I can't feel my legs." And then Dylan's face appeared above mine, blocking out the sunlight, his smile curling like a knife. "Nice pratfall, sis." "Very dramatic," he said, turning to his buddies as they snickered. "She always was a theater kid." His words rang in my ears as panic clawed through me. I tried to sit up to prove him wrong, but my body refused. My arms moved, yes, but when I willed my legs to shift, nothing happened. No flicker, no twitch, just emptiness. "I'm serious," I cried, my voice shaking but stronger now, climbing higher with fear. "Something's wrong. I can't move my legs. I hit the concrete." Tears blurred my vision, the salty sting mixing with the sweat dripping down my temples. Dylan rolled his eyes like I was ruining the punchline of his joke. "Come on, Hannah, get up. You're embarrassing yourself." My body wouldn't obey, and the more I begged, the less anyone seemed willing to believe me. The humiliation stung almost as much as the terror. My cheeks were wet, my throat raw as I pleaded, "Please call an ambulance. I think I'm really hurt." By then a small crowd had circled me, neighbors, Dylan's friends, strangers clutching their beers like they were watching a show. Their faces weren't kind. They were uncomfortable, hesitant, waiting to see how Dylan spun it before deciding if they should care. And then my father Charles cut through the crowd, his presence as commanding as always, irritation written in every line of his face. "What's going on here, Hannah? Why are you on the ground?" Relief bubbled in me for a moment. I thought finally, someone would take me seriously. "Dad," I sobbed, "I slipped." I hit my back on the pool edge. "I can't feel my legs. I need to go to the hospital." My words tumbled out fast, frantic, desperate, but instead of urgency, I got a scoff, sharp and dismissive. "For God's sake, Hannah," he barked, gesturing at the deck like it was a trophy. "The boards are perfectly safe. I had them installed by professionals. Stop being dramatic. Walk it off. Stop being a baby. You're making a scene at your brother's party." My father's words cut sharper than the impact on my spine, sharper even than the pain tearing through my back and head. I lay there unable to move, staring up at him, realizing that even now, when my body was screaming for help, when my legs had gone completely numb, he saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience. My mother Linda drifted over, wringing her hands, murmuring that maybe they should help me up, but her eyes flicked nervously toward the guests. It wasn't compassion, it was embarrassment. "People are watching," she whispered, like that was the real emergency. My voice broke as I begged them again, louder this time, desperation scraping my throat raw. "I can't get up. Please, I need an ambulance." Instead, she crouched beside me, her perfume cloying in the hot sun, her face twisted in quiet fury. Her voice was low, "Just for me. Hannah Brooks, that is enough. You've always been jealous of your brother, but this is going too far. You are ruining his birthday party with this little performance." I stared at her, numb with disbelief that she could see me sprawled helpless on concrete and still call me an actress. The pain surged outward in relentless waves, my head pounding so hard I thought it might split. Nausea rose in my throat, sour and dizzying. "I think I'm going to be sick," I moaned, turning to the side, but even that movement made the world tilt. From somewhere behind me I heard Dylan's voice, smug and slurred. "She's probably drunk." Classic Hannah. Can't handle her alcohol. The lie stung, not because it was new, but because it was so familiar. That was my family's script. Whatever truth I spoke, they rewrote me into the fool. The sun burned against my skin, baking me in sweat. I could feel strange prickles starting in my fingertips, spreading like pins and needles. I knew enough to recognize it as a bad sign, maybe shock, maybe something worse. My voice barely rose above a whisper now, thin and broken. "Please, I need help." But my father had already walked away, spatula in hand, back to the grill like nothing had happened. My mother busied herself smoothing her dress, assuring the guests I'd always had these episodes, and Dylan had wandered off to brag about the jet ski again. And me? I lay there on the edge of the pool, immobile, invisible, my body failing, and my family pretending it wasn't happening. The betrayal cut deeper than anything in my spine ever could. And then, like a sudden shift in the weather, a different voice broke through, firm, clear, commanding. "Excuse me, I'm a nurse." "Let me through." The crowd parted reluctantly, and into my blurred vision came a woman I'd never seen before. She had kind eyes, hair pulled back neatly, and hands that radiated competence as she went straight for my wrist, finding my pulse. "Hi there, I'm Vanessa. I work in the ER at Harborview," she said gently, anchoring me with her calm. "Can you tell me your name?" My teeth chattered, though the air was warm, and I croaked out, "Hannah." Her face softened with determination. "Okay, Hannah. I need you to stay very, very still." And for the first time that day, someone believed me. When Vanessa leaned in and asked what happened, my words tumbled out between shallow breaths. I told her about the fall, about the sickening crack when my back hit the concrete edge, about how my legs had gone silent in an instant. She didn't flinch or gasp, just listened, her face calm in a way that steadied me even as terror clawed at my chest. She pressed gently along my thighs, my calves, my ankles, asking, "Can you feel this?" I shook my head with each touch, tears slipping sideways into my hair. "Can you move your toes?" I willed them with everything in me, but nothing happened. The emptiness where motion should have been was more terrifying than the pain itself. Her voice turned crisp and steady. "I'm calling an ambulance." The words cracked through the humid air like thunder. My mother Linda appeared again, her face tight with a smile for the guests and a scowl for me. "She doesn't need an ambulance. She just needs to get up and stop making a scene." I'll never forget the way Vanessa looked at her then, firm, unwavering. "Ma'am, your daughter has signs of a spinal cord injury. Moving her could cause permanent damage. She needs emergency medical attention immediately." For the first time that day, I saw something flicker in my mother's eyes. Something almost like fear. Spinal cord injury? That's impossible. She just slipped. Vanessa didn't even blink. Falls are one of the most common causes of spinal injuries. And from what I can see, she hit that concrete hard. She was already on the phone with 911, her voice even as she rattled off my symptoms and location, when my father Charles pushed through the crowd. His voice carried the same authority he used to silence boardroom discussions. "What's this about an ambulance?" He looked at me, not with concern, but suspicion, like I was pulling some elaborate stunt. Vanessa raised a hand, still speaking to the dispatcher, not intimidated in the slightest. When she hung up, she turned to him with professional certainty. "Sir, your daughter may have a serious spinal injury. The paramedics will be here in 10 minutes. She must not be moved." And then, for the first time, I watched the color drain from my father's face. He'd spent decades dismissing me, training me to doubt myself, but here was a stranger in scrubs, calling it what it was: real, serious, life-threatening. His eyes darted, searching for someone else to blame, as though responsibility might land anywhere but at his feet. My voice cracked through the fog of pain. "The deck was slippery." "Like oil." His gaze snapped to me, sharp and dismissive. "That's ridiculous." "I had it sealed yesterday. It's not slippery." But Vanessa was already crouched near the boards, running her fingers across the surface. She rubbed her fingertips together, her mouth tightening. "This isn't water," she said, her voice hardening. "This feels like some kind of lubricant." The air went still, 30 people holding their breath at once, and then, almost on cue, Dylan wandered over, beer still in hand, his smirk wobbling as the spotlight shifted to him. I'll never forget the look on Dylan's face when Vanessa's words landed. The flush of alcohol drained from his cheeks as if someone had flipped a switch. "It was just a joke," he muttered, staring at the ground, his bravado evaporating. "Just a little prank. I put some of Dad's deck oil on a few boards. I thought she'd slip, maybe fall in the pool. I didn't think—" His voice trailed off, and for once I saw something that looked like recognition flicker across his face, as if the weight of what he'd done was finally pressing down on him. The silence that followed was suffocating. People shuffled, shifted, looked anywhere but at me. And lying there, flat on my back, unable to move, I saw it all clearly. This was the Brooks family in sharp relief. The casual cruelty, the reflex to protect Dylan at all costs, the blindness to my suffering. Only now, with a stranger calling it what it was, with sirens piercing the distance, there was no dismissing it away. The sound grew louder, closer, cutting through the heavy stillness that had settled over the backyard. Each wail of the siren was both terrifying and a lifeline. Vanessa stayed by my side, her hand lightly resting on my wrist, her voice a low anchor. "Try to stay calm, Hannah. Just focus on your breathing. Help is almost here." I tried. I really did. But panic kept clawing at me, the numbness in my legs spreading like a shadow. Each shallow breath rippling pain through my spine, nausea rolling in my stomach. Around us, the party was dissolving. Guests began to scatter, murmuring excuses, some slipping away entirely, unwilling to be part of what this had become. Others lingered at the edges, their faces a mix of discomfort and morbid curiosity, as though they couldn't look away from the wreckage. My mother hovered just outside the circle, wringing her hands, tugging at her blouse, fussing with her hair. Gestures that betrayed not love or concern, but anxiety about appearances. "Do you really think this is necessary?" she asked Vanessa, her voice pitched high with nerves. "Maybe we could just take her to urgent care ourselves." Vanessa didn't even look up as she replied, firm and unshakable, "Absolutely not. She needs proper immobilization and transport. Any wrong movement could cause permanent damage." My mother's mouth snapped shut, though the worry in her eyes was still about judgment, not me. My father, meanwhile, had finally moved, striding toward the front of the house, his jaw tight as though directing paramedics could reassert some control. Dylan stood off to the side, still frozen, his beard dangling forgotten in his hand, the reality of what he had done finally cracking through his denial. When the paramedics burst through the gate, it felt like the world shifted. 2 women and a man in uniform pushed a stretcher across the grass with practiced urgency. Vanessa met them halfway, rattling off my condition and the circumstances of the fall like she'd rehearsed it. The lead medic, a woman with short brown hair and a name tag that read Sarah, knelt beside me, her voice calm and clear. "Hello, Hannah. I'm Sarah. We're going to take good care of you." She placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "Can you tell me where the pain is worst?" My throat tightened, but I forced the words out. "My lower back and my head. But I can't feel anything below my waist." Saying it out loud made it real in a way that nearly broke me. But Sarah nodded, not with pity, but with determination. "Okay, that's important. We'll keep you safe. We'll do this step by step." And for the first time since I hit the ground, I felt the faintest flicker of hope, because finally, someone was here who wasn't going to pretend my pain didn't exist. Sarah's voice was steady, professional, but gentle, like she'd said these words 1,000 times before. "We're going to place a cervical collar on you to stabilize your neck, then carefully roll you onto a backboard. Please don't try to help us move you, just stay as still as possible." I nodded weakly, my throat tight, the sun blazing above me while the world spun with the metallic tang of fear. Her hands were efficient, sliding the stiff collar around my neck, the edges pressing into my jaw, as she asked about the fall, how it happened, if I'd lost consciousness. My answers came haltingly, fragments of memory, while Vanessa filled in the gaps with crisp details of my vital signs, the initial checks she'd made. For the first time since the impact, I felt like the truth was being written down somewhere, not erased by family denial. And then Sarah asked the question that sliced through the backyard like a knife. Was the surface where you fell naturally slippery, or did something cause it? I opened my mouth, but Vanessa spoke first, her tone calm but edged with anger. There's oil on those boards. Not water. Oil. I believe it was placed there deliberately. Sarah stopped, eyes snapping up. Deliberately? Can you clarify? Vanessa didn't hesitate. Her brother admitted it. He said it was a prank. He meant for her to slip. The air seemed to collapse around us. Sarah turned slowly toward Dylan, who stood with his hands jammed into his pockets, gaze fixed on the ground. Sir, is that accurate? Did you intentionally create a slipping hazard that led to this injury? Dylan shifted, his voice small, defensive. It was just supposed to be a joke. I didn't think she'd get hurt like this. Sarah's expression hardened into steel. Mike, document this. Photos, samples. One of the medics nodded, already crouching by the deck with a small camera, snapping evidence that would follow us into a courtroom. Then came the hardest part. Sarah crouched near my shoulder again. On my count, 1, 2, 3. Their practiced hands rolled me in unison, and though they were careful, the pain was indescribable, ripping through me like fire. A cry tore from my throat before I could stop it. Sarah's voice softened, almost maternal. I know it hurts, Hannah. We'll get you something for the pain once you're secure. They slid the rigid board beneath me, strapped me down, tightened the belts across my chest and hips. I felt caged, but also, finally, protected. They lifted me onto the stretcher, the canvas creaking beneath my weight, while wires and tubes seemed to grow out of my arms. An oxygen mask descended over my face, cool air rushing into my lungs, and an IV stung into place. Sarah frowned at the monitor, her brow knitting. Blood pressures low, heart rate elevated. We need to move now. It was then, as the stretcher wheels locked into place, that I heard my mother's voice again. Not sharp this time, not dismissive, small, fragile. Is she going to be all right? Her tone was that of a child herself, suddenly aware the script had slipped out of her hands. Sarah didn't sugarcoat it, didn't pretend to offer comfort where none could be promised. She's showing signs of a significant spinal injury, she said flatly. We need to get her to the hospital immediately. The words rang in the hot afternoon air, undeniable. For the first time in my life, my family was forced to see me not as dramatic, not as inconvenient, but as broken. And the worst part was, I didn't know if I would ever be whole again. The sooner we get her to a trauma center, the better her chances for recovery, Sarah said firmly, her words slicing through the heavy air. As they adjusted straps on the stretcher, I caught sight of Mike returning from the deck. He leaned toward Sarah, showing her something on the small screen of his camera. Her expression darkened instantly, the kind of look that told you this wasn't just medical anymore. Based on what I'm seeing and the circumstances described, I'm going to request police assistance, she announced. My father Charles came storming back from the front yard, his voice booming with indignation. Police? Surely that's not necessary. This was just an unfortunate accident. But Sarah didn't flinch. She looked him straight in the eye and said, Sir, deliberately creating a hazardous condition that results in serious injury is not just an accident. And I understand there was a delay in seeking medical attention despite your daughter reporting loss of sensation. This is a medical emergency. My father's face flushed, his jaw tightening as if he could argue the facts back into submission. Now wait just a minute, he barked, his hands chopping the air. You cannot come into my home and make accusations like that. Behind the oxygen mask, my voice was a rasp, but I forced the words out. Dad, please, just let them help me. And for the first time in my life, my father didn't have a retort. He went silent, his authority clipped by reality. Sarah radioed in a calm, precise request for police presence, then turned back to me with the steadiness of someone who had carried lives in her hands before. We're going to move you now. The ride might be uncomfortable, but we'll keep you as stable as possible. The stretcher wheels rattled over the boards, then through the house, past the smell of charcoal and spilled beer, past the guests who avoided my eyes. In those final moments before the doors closed, I caught one last tableau of my family. My father, red-faced and gesturing angrily at Mike, as if yelling could undo evidence. My mother, arms wrapped tightly around herself, her eyes darting like a trapped bird, more concerned with appearances than reality. And Dylan, still frozen where he stood, shoulders hunched, the beer limp in his hand, watching the wreckage of his cruelty finally catch up with him. Then the flashing lights filled the driveway as a police cruiser rolled in, quiet but undeniable. Despite the pain burning through me, a strange relief swelled in my chest. For the first time in my life, someone was taking my suffering seriously. The doors shut with a metallic thud, sealing me inside the ambulance. As the vehicle lurched forward, the paramedics hovered with needles, wires, and monitors, their voices low and urgent. Medication rushed cold into my vein, softening the edges of the agony. The city blurred past the small window, and I let my eyes fall closed, surrendering to the dark. When I opened them again, the world had changed. The air smelled sharp and antiseptic, machines beeped in steady rhythm, and fluorescent light pressed against my eyelids. For a moment I couldn't remember where I was or why. And then it crashed back. The fall, the numbness, the police lights, Dylan's face paling as his prank unraveled into something criminal. A figure leaned into my blurry vision, his voice warm, steady. "Welcome back, Hannah. I'm Carlos. I'll be your nurse tonight." And with those words, I realized I was in a place where, at least for now, I would be cared for. When I finally woke fully, the first face I saw wasn't family. It was Carlos, the nurse. His voice was calm, almost gentle as he leaned over my bed. "You're at Harborview Medical Center, Hannah. Do you remember what happened?" My throat was raw, my words scraped out in a rasp. "I fell. At my brother's birthday party." I couldn't feel my legs. He nodded, making a note on a clipboard, his expression careful but kind. "That's right. You've been in and out of consciousness for about 12 hours now. The doctor will be here shortly to go over everything with you." He offered me water through a straw, steadying the cup as I took small sips, each swallow sending little flares of pain down my back. "What's wrong with me?" I whispered, my voice trembling. I still can't move my legs. Does that mean—" Carlos cut me off gently, not unkindly. "The doctor will explain. She should be here any minute. Try to stay calm." But calm felt impossible. My mind was a carousel of panic. What if this is forever? What if my life as I knew it ended on that deck? My fingers clutched at the blanket, trying to anchor myself to something solid. Almost as if on cue, the door opened and a woman in a white coat stepped inside. She was in her 50s, her dark hair streaked with silver, pulled neatly into a bun. Her presence carried quiet authority, the kind that makes you instinctively trust her. "Good morning, Hannah," she said, pulling up a chair so she could sit level with me. "I'm Dr. Angela Rosenfeld, the neurosurgeon overseeing your care. How are you feeling?" My eyes filled before I could stop them. "Scared," I admitted, "and in pain. Why can't I feel my legs? What happened to me?" Dr. Rosenfeld folded her hands, her gaze steady, not cruel, but not sugar-coated either. "When you fell, you sustained what we call an incomplete spinal cord injury at the T12 to L1 level, which is in your lower back. That means the spinal cord was damaged, but not completely severed." Her words fell into me like stones into water, heavy, rippling outward. "Right now, that's why you don't have movement or sensation below the waist. With time, therapy, and the right medical support, we'll know more about your potential for recovery. But I need you to understand, this is serious, Hannah. Your life is going to look very different from now on." The air in the room thickened, every beep of the monitor a reminder that the body I had known, the life I had built, had shattered in one single cruel moment. Dr. Rosenfeld pulled up a tablet and turned the screen toward me. Grainy black and white images filled the display, lines and shadows that didn't look like any part of me until she pointed with her pen. "Here," she said, her tone even but heavy, "this is where the impact fractured 2 vertebrae. And here, you can see the spinal cord, compressed by fragments." My stomach twisted as she explained how they'd rushed me into emergency surgery, removing the pieces of bone that had threatened to sever everything completely. "We stabilized your spine with rods and screws," she added, almost matter of fact, but the words landed like bricks. Hardware now held me together, an invisible scaffolding keeping me upright while my body waged war on itself. The question had been simmering inside me since the pool deck, and it clawed its way out before I could stop it. "Will I walk again?" My voice cracked, small and terrified. Dr. Rosenfeld didn't flinch, didn't look away. She also didn't offer the false comfort I secretly craved. "Spinal cord injuries are complex," she said, carefully choosing her words. "Outcomes can vary widely. The fact that yours is an incomplete injury is, in medical terms, a positive sign. The cord wasn't fully severed. That means there is potential for recovery." She spoke of weeks and months, of how healing unfolds slowly, of physical therapy that could awaken pathways, long thought silent. "Some patients walked again," she said. "Others never did." The words hung between us like a fragile thread, both hope and warning wound together. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to say the thing I feared most. "So I might be paralyzed. Forever." The word tasted bitter, unreal. Dr. Rosenfeld leaned forward, her tone steady but cautious. "I wouldn't use the word forever at this stage. But yes, right now you are experiencing paraplegia, paralysis of the lower limbs. Our goal is to maximize your recovery, but you should prepare yourself for the possibility of long-term mobility challenges." She said it clinically, gently, but there was no way to soften the truth. The world tilted again, not from the injury this time, but from the enormity of what she had just confirmed. Her words hit me harder than the concrete ever could. I had walked into my brother's backyard, a healthy 28-year-old woman, annoyed but intact, still believing in the illusion that my life was mine to control. And I had left it strapped to a backboard, broken, my body forever altered by a prank gone too far, and a lifetime of cruelty catching up in a single, devastating moment. I felt the weight of it press into my chest, crushing, surreal, in the sterile hospital room, with monitors beeping and antiseptic stinging my nose. I realized I was no longer the same woman. That Hannah Brooks was gone, and whoever I was becoming had only just begun to take shape. All of this, my broken body, the rods now holding my spine together, the monitor beeping beside me, because of a prank and because my family had refused to take my pain seriously. Dr. Rosenfeld's voice softened, but there was a shift in her tone, a gravity that made me brace myself. "There's something else we need to discuss. The circumstances of your injury have prompted an investigation. 2 police officers are here and waiting to speak with you when you feel ready." I closed my eyes, the sterile lights pressing through my lids, and the words sank deep. An investigation. My brother had admitted it. He'd poured oil onto the deck so I would slip. A joke, he'd said. A joke that had ended my life as I knew it. "He confessed," I murmured, my throat raw. "Dylan put the oil down. He wanted me to slip. He thought it would be funny." Dr. Rosenfeld nodded, her expression calm, but edged with something harder than sympathy. "That's consistent with what the paramedics reported. They also raised concerns about the delay in seeking medical help after your fall." Her words triggered the sting of memory, sharp and humiliating. "My parents didn't believe me," I said, tears rising again. "They told me to walk it off. My mother said I was ruining Dylan's birthday. They accused me of being dramatic. Like always, saying it out loud made my chest tighten, because even here, in a hospital bed, their voices still echoed inside me louder than the monitors. For the first time, I saw a crack in Dr. Rosenfeld's professional composure, a flash of anger flickering across her face. "In cases of suspected spinal cord injury," she said carefully, "immediate immobilization and transport are critical. Delays can significantly worsen the outcome." I gripped the blanket with trembling hands, my heart pounding in my ears. The question slipped out before I could stop it, my voice small and trembling. "Are you saying, if they had called an ambulance right away, I might not be paralyzed?" The silence between us swelled, thick and unbearable. She didn't rush to fill it, and that pause was louder than any answer. "I can't say with certainty," she replied finally, her voice low, measured. "But yes, the delay may have affected the extent of your injury." The room tilted. My stomach dropped, bile rising in my throat. The idea that my own parents' disbelief, their refusal to act, could have stolen whatever chance I had left. It was a weight I didn't know how to carry. The betrayal wasn't new, but now it was written into my body, carved into my spine, and there was no erasing it. Dr. Rosenfeld's words settled over me like a heavy blanket. Every minute counts. The injury itself was unbearable enough, but the knowledge that it might not have been this severe, that some of this devastation might have been avoided if my family had simply believed me, was almost too much to hold inside. Tears spilled freely, soaking the corners of the hospital pillow, hot with grief and rage. Betrayal wasn't new in my life, but now it was stitched into my body, fused into bone and scar. "After a moment, doctor." Rosenfeld asked gently if I felt up to speaking with the police now or if I'd prefer to rest. I wiped at my eyes with the tissue Carlos pressed into my hand. "I'll talk to them," I whispered. "I want them to know what happened." For once in my life, I wasn't going to let anyone else tell my story for me. She left to fetch the officers, and Carlos stayed by my bedside, adjusting the pillows, tilting the bed slightly so I could breathe easier. The kindness in his simple gestures made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt at home in decades. When the officers entered, I was surprised to see two women, Detective Sullivan and Officer Chen. Somehow their presence made me feel less exposed, less like I was being cross-examined, and more like I might finally be protected. They introduced themselves, explained that they were investigating the circumstances of my injury, and assured me they would go at my pace. "We understand this is difficult," Detective Sullivan said, her tone steady but not unkind. "But we need to ask you some questions about what happened yesterday." I closed my eyes for a moment, inhaled slowly, and began. I told them everything, arriving at Dylan's party with dread already tightening my stomach, watching him grow louder and meaner as the alcohol flowed, the moment I decided to leave, and then the slick deck beneath my feet. I described the sudden fall, the crack of bone against concrete, the terror when my body went silent, and I told them the part that burned the deepest, the way my family stood over me, dismissed me, mocked me, and left me lying there until a stranger intervened. Detective Sullivan leaned forward slightly, her pen pausing over her notebook. "So, to be clear," she asked, her voice precise, "after you fell, you reported that you could not feel or move your legs, and your family chose not to call for medical help?" My throat tightened, but I forced myself to meet her eyes. "Yes," I said, my voice breaking but certain. "I begged them. I told them over and over that I couldn't move, and they told me to walk it off. They accused me of ruining Dylan's birthday. They left me on the ground while they kept partying. Saying it out loud in that sterile room felt like tearing open an old wound, but it also felt like the first time in my life the truth was finally being recorded, word for word, without being twisted or erased. No one called for help, I told them, my voice trembling but clear. Not until Vanessa, the nurse who happened to be there, stepped in. That was at least 15, maybe 20 minutes after I fell. In that time, my father told me to walk it off, and my mother accused me of trying to ruin Dylan's birthday. Officer Chen's pen scratched across her notepad, then she looked up, her eyes sharp. "And your brother admitted to putting oil on the deck?" My throat tightened, but I nodded. "Yes, he said it was supposed to be a prank. He thought I'd slip and maybe fall into the pool. He didn't think..." My voice cracked. He didn't think I'd hit the concrete edge. The two women exchanged a glance that told me more than words ever could. What I was saying wasn't just a story. It was evidence fitting neatly into a pattern they already knew. Detective Sullivan leaned forward slightly, her tone careful but steady. "We should let you know, Ms. Brooks, that we've already taken statements from several witnesses at the scene, including Nurse Vanessa Reed and the paramedics who transported you. Evidence was also collected from the deck. It confirmed the presence of deck oil in the area where you fell." She paused, her eyes locking on mine before continuing. "Your brother, Dylan Brooks, was taken into custody last night on charges of reckless endangerment resulting in serious bodily harm. Your parents, Charles and Linda Brooks, are currently under investigation for negligence and failure to provide necessary medical assistance." The words rang in the sterile room like church bells, both shocking and undeniable. For a second, I couldn't breathe. My family had dismissed me my whole life, gaslit me into silence, turned every pain into my fault. But the idea of them facing actual criminal charges, of Dylan sitting in a jail cell, of my parents answering to the law instead of brushing me aside, was almost too surreal to grasp. They could go to jail?" I asked, my voice so faint it barely reached my own ears. Detective Sullivan didn't blink. "That decision will be made by the district attorney and ultimately by the courts. But the charges are serious, Hannah. Very serious." I lay there in the antiseptic light, monitors beeping steadily beside me, the oxygen mask hissing at my cheek. A swirl of emotions crashed inside me: shock, grief, vindication, guilt. Part of me wanted to scream that it was too much, that even after everything they had done, they were still my family. But another part, the part that had been silenced since childhood, felt something else rising for the first time: the faint, trembling taste of justice. The officers thanked me for my cooperation and promised to keep me updated, and then they were gone, their footsteps echoing down the hall until the room was quiet again. I lay there in the hum of monitors and fluorescent light, staring at the ceiling, trying to absorb the avalanche of everything. The physical reality of my injury already felt crushing, the weight of my body unresponsive below the waist, the rods now holding me together, but the legal and emotional fallout layered over it until I could barely breathe. My brother in custody, my parents under investigation. The words still felt foreign, like dialogue from someone else's life. No one from my family had called, no one had visited. I couldn't tell if the silence meant legal restrictions or if they were simply doing what they had always done, pretending nothing was their fault, vanishing when accountability loomed. Evening shadows stretched long against the hospital blinds when Marcus, a hospital social worker, appeared at my door. He carried a folder and a kind of practiced calm, the kind you could tell was meant to anchor patients in free fall. He introduced himself, sat beside my bed, and explained his role. He would be coordinating my care plan, rehab options, therapy referrals, resources for adjusting to a life reshaped by a spinal cord injury. His words were gentle but direct. "You're looking at a significant recovery period, Hannah. It's going to be a marathon, not a sprint." He outlined inpatient rehabilitation centers, occupational therapy, support groups for patients with new disabilities. I nodded along, but inside I felt split in two. One half of me clung to the logistics, therapy schedules, adaptive equipment, the mechanics of survival, while the other half floated above it all, still reeling from the betrayal. The people who should have been sitting by my bed, holding my hand, promising they'd walk this path with me, were absent. Worse, they were implicated in causing the very thing I was now left to endure. A part of me longed for them to walk through the door, to say they were sorry, to finally see me. But a deeper, sharper part whispered that maybe this silence was a gift, that maybe it was safer for me to rebuild a life without them in it. Marcus handed me a pamphlet about peer support groups, his voice steady as he assured me that healing wasn't only physical, that finding others who understood could make all the difference. I stared at the glossy pages without really seeing them, my mind circling the truth I couldn't yet say out loud. I had entered my brother's party as their scapegoat, and I was leaving it broken, but finally. finally believed. Marcus spoke in that calm, measured tone social workers must practice, outlining what the road ahead would look like. Once you're stable enough to leave acute care, you'll likely spend several weeks in an inpatient rehabilitation facility, followed by outpatient therapy that could last months. His words landed one by one like weights being stacked on my chest. I swallowed hard, the practical pieces of my life suddenly crashing into focus. "I live alone," I blurted out. "My apartment has stairs." The thought of the narrow flight leading up to my place, of dragging my unresponsive body through that front door, was enough to make my stomach twist. "And my job. I'm an elementary school teacher. I'm on my feet all day. I don't know how I could ever—" My voice cracked. Marcus nodded, not with pity, but with steady understanding, like he'd heard these fears 100 times and knew they were all valid. "These are challenges," he said gently, "but not insurmountable ones. There are resources to help: home modifications, vocational rehabilitation, disability benefits. You won't be left to figure this out alone." He slid a packet across the tray table, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. The bold headings: independent living options, mobility support, vocational services, blurred before my eyes. All I could see was my classroom, the bright bulletin boards, the tiny desks arranged in neat rows, my students' expectant faces. I imagined myself rolling in on wheels instead of striding across the room, imagined the questions in their voices, the pity in their eyes. The pain in my spine flared as I shifted slightly, pulling me back into the moment. I pressed my hands into the blanket, tears prickling hot at the corners of my eyes. "It's just so much," I whispered. "Too much." Marcus leaned forward, his voice low but steady. "It is a lot. And it's okay to feel overwhelmed. Right now, it's about one step at a time. Survival first, then healing, then rebuilding." His certainty clashed with the storm inside me. Rage at Dylan, grief over my body, the suffocating guilt that my parents' negligence had helped put me here. I stared at the ceiling, fluorescent lights humming, and felt the weight of 2 lives pressing against me. The one I had just lost and the one I hadn't yet begun. The truth was, I didn't know if I was strong enough to face either. But sitting there in that sterile room with Marcus quietly waiting beside me, I realized for the first time that maybe strength didn't have to mean standing on my own. Maybe it would mean letting others help me, even when my family never had. In the space of a single day, every anchor of my life had been ripped up and scattered. My body, my home, my career, even the brittle threads of my family ties. All of it had shifted, fractured in ways I was only beginning to understand. That first night, alone in my hospital room with machines beeping steadily in the dark, I cried harder than I had since childhood. I cried for the legs that no longer answered me, for the classroom full of children I might never stand before again, for the home with stairs that suddenly felt like a fortress I could no longer enter. But woven into the grief was something surprising, something new, a small stubborn spark of determination. I had survived 28 years of my family's emotional abuse, of their gaslighting and denial. Somehow, I would survive this too, and this time, for the first time, they would face real consequences for what they had done. The weeks that followed blurred together in a haze of hospital routines. I drifted between pain and medication, between procedures and endless checks of blood pressure and reflexes. Nurses rotated in and out, each with different voices and different ways of adjusting the same straps, lifting the same blankets, recording the same notes. Every morning brought another round of examinations, another reminder that I was now a patient in every sense of the word. The steady rhythm of machines became my soundtrack, replacing the chatter of students or the hum of a city street. Time lost its usual shape, collapsing into a cycle of day and night, marked only by the change of shifts and the drip of IV fluids. Dr. Rosenfeld came often, her presence a strange comfort, even when her news was difficult. She explained again and again what the MRI showed, what the surgery had achieved, what the risks still were. My spine was stabilized, The pressure on my cord reduced, but the damage remained severe. Healing would take time, months, maybe years, and there was no guarantee of how much function I might regain. She never sugarcoated it, and though her honesty hurt, it also grounded me. I found myself clinging to her words, parsing every phrase for glimmers of hope. If it healed at all, she had said, and that caveat haunted me in the quiet hours when sleep wouldn't come. Through it all, I began to sense the beginnings of a new rhythm, however fragile. I was no longer just the broken daughter dismissed at the side of a pool. I was a woman staring into an unknown future, trembling but alive, tethered to machines, yet holding on to the faint light of determination that had flickered to life in me that first night. I didn't know what recovery would look like, or how much of my old life I could reclaim, but I knew one thing for certain. This time, I would not let their cruelty erase me. Dr. Rosenfeld came in on one of her daily visits, her presence a steady fixture in the blur of my hospital days. She pulled up her tablet and explained what my medical chart now said in black and white. You have what we call an Asia C classification. That means you've preserved some motor function below the level of injury, but not enough to be useful right now. You also have some sensory preservation, which is a positive sign. I nodded, though the words felt like they belonged in someone else's life. In my own body, I had begun to notice flickers of change, faint tingling in my thighs, an occasional ghost-like sensation in my calves, a whisper of awareness where there had been nothing. The nurses celebrated these tiny milestones, and even I clung to them, though I still couldn't lift my toes or summon strength in my legs. My hips and thighs responded weakly, but below the knees there was only silence. It was progress, yes, but it also underscored how far I had to go. The physical fight was brutal enough, but it wasn't the only battle I was fighting. 10 days after the fall, when the sterile rhythms of the hospital had almost become familiar, a woman in a dark suit appeared in my doorway. She introduced herself as Laura Jensen, an assistant district attorney. Her tone was professional, clipped, but not unkind. The police investigation into your case has been completed, she said, sliding into the chair beside my bed. Based on the evidence collected and witness statements, we filed formal charges against your brother and parents. The words seemed to vibrate in the air, too heavy to land all at once. I had spent years knowing in my bones that what they did to me was wrong, but hearing that the law, the system outside our family bubble, agreed was something else entirely. My brother, my parents facing courtrooms and judges and charges they couldn't talk their way out of. My chest tightened with a swirl of emotions I couldn't even name. Vindication, grief, guilt. I had wanted justice, yes, but part of me had never truly believed it would come. I stared down at my hands, thin against the hospital blanket. IV taped across the back of one. So it's real, I whispered. They're actually being held accountable. Laura nodded. It's real. Dylan has been charged with reckless endangerment resulting in serious bodily harm. Your parents are facing charges of criminal negligence and failure to provide medical assistance. The next steps will involve hearings, and you may be asked to testify. Her words blurred for a moment as my mind reeled. I thought of my father's dismissive scowl, my mother's whispered accusations, Dylan's smirk as he watched me fall. For the first time, the world beyond our home saw them as I had always seen them, and it terrified me almost as much as it relieved me. Laura didn't sugarcoat it. Dylan was facing a felony charge of reckless endangerment, resulting in serious bodily injury, with a maximum sentence of 10 years. My parents were charged with criminal negligence and failure to provide necessary medical assistance, up to 5 years each if convicted. Of course, she added, her tone pragmatic, those are maximums. Actual sentences depend on many factors: no prior criminal history, their willingness to plead guilty, how much responsibility they're willing to accept. Her words floated in the antiseptic air, legalese that translated to something I could barely wrap my head around. My family could go to prison because of what they had done to me. Then came another layer, one I hadn't expected. You also have the right to file a civil lawsuit, she explained. Regardless of what happens in criminal court, you can pursue damages. Spinal cord injuries carry lifetime costs in the millions: medical care, adaptive equipment, home modifications, loss of wages, pain and suffering. I felt my pulse quicken, panic gnawing at my ribs. I thought of my students' little faces, of the classroom I might never stand in again. I thought of the rent on my apartment, the stairs I might never climb, the ordinary independence that now felt like a luxury. It was overwhelming, this tangle of justice and survival. Part of me wanted nothing more than to sever every tie, to let Dylan, my father, my mother, all of them, fade from my life like a bad dream. But the truth was harsher. My reality now included hospital bills, specialized wheelchairs, ramps, therapies I would need for the rest of my life. Their actions hadn't just taken my mobility, they had saddled me with a financial burden so crushing I couldn't ignore it. Cutting ties sounded clean in theory, but survival meant facing them again, this time across a courtroom instead of a dinner table. I lay back against the pillows, the monitor beeping in its steady rhythm, trying to steady my own breath. Justice, accountability, survival, it all swirled together, and I couldn't tell where one ended and the next began. For years I had begged them to see me, to hear me. Now the law itself was listening, and as terrifying as it was, a part of me knew I couldn't walk away from that, not if I wanted to reclaim my life. Laura connected me with a personal injury attorney the very next day, a man named Michael Greenberg who specialized in spinal cord injury cases. He walked into my hospital room with a briefcase and the kind of calm confidence that felt foreign in my world of beeping monitors and pain charts. He sat across from me, reviewing the thick stack of police reports and medical records. And after only a few minutes, he looked up and said plainly, "Your case is strong." The words landed like both comfort and burden. Strong, because the truth was undeniable. Heavy, because the truth involved my own blood. Michael explained that liability was clear, especially given Dylan's admission that he had deliberately poured oil on the boards. My parents, too, were implicated by their refusal to seek medical help. Their homeowner's insurance will likely cover some of the damages, he said, but for the full compensation you're entitled to, we'd have to pursue their personal assets. My stomach twisted at the thought. Even after everything, these were still the people who had raised me, who had signed my report cards and taken Christmas photos with me, no matter how cruel or hollow those gestures had been. The idea of dragging them into court, of dismantling what little they had left, felt like a betrayal layered on top of betrayal. But Michael was patient, steady. He didn't press, didn't manipulate. He just laid out the truth I'd been avoiding. "Hannah, this isn't about revenge. It's about survival. You're facing a lifetime of medical costs, adaptive equipment, therapy, lost income. If you want to live as fully and independently as possible, you need resources. That's what this is for." I stared down at my hands, tracing the faint indentations where IV tape had been peeled away, and I realized he was right. I wasn't choosing between vengeance and forgiveness. I was choosing between survival and ruin. So I told him yes, file the lawsuit. The words tasted bitter, necessary, and heartbreaking all at once. When he left, the room felt quieter than before, the decision echoing inside me like a verdict. Meanwhile, my body continued its slow, agonizing recovery. Physical therapy sessions began in cautious increments, stretching what muscles I could control, coaxing sensation where there was only silence. Every movement reminded me of what I'd lost. Every small flicker of progress reminded me of what I still might fight for. And in the background of it all, the lawsuit loomed, proof that my fight for survival was no longer just physical. It was legal, emotional, and deeply, painfully personal. After 2 weeks in acute care, they wheeled me into a place that would become my whole world for the next stretch of time, a specialized spinal cord injury rehabilitation center. The building was modern, bright, humming with the energy of people fighting to reclaim pieces of themselves. Here, recovery wasn't a side note, it was the central mission. Every hallway seemed filled with determination. Therapists coaxing movement from resistant limbs, nurses coaching transfers with the patience of saints, psychologists reminding us that healing wasn't just physical. My team was introduced like a cast of characters in a story I never wanted to star in, each one focused on helping me adjust to this new reality. My primary physical therapist was David, a man in his 40s whose voice carried both relentless optimism and the grounded realism of someone who had walked this path beside many before me. "Our goal is to maximize whatever return of function you experience," he told me, his tone steady. "But just as important is learning independence with the function you have today." The days fell into a rhythm that was exhausting, sometimes humiliating, and absolutely necessary. Mornings started with 2 solid hours of physical therapy, straps around my waist, parallel bars beneath my hands, David coaxing life from the muscles that still worked. We practiced transfers until my arms trembled. Bed to wheelchair, chair to mat back to chair. Each success was measured in inches, sweat pouring down my back, my pride bruised raw. Afternoons shifted to occupational therapy, where small, ordinary acts turned into full lessons: how to dress myself sitting down, how to stir a pot without tipping from my chair, how to imagine a kitchen redesigned for hands and wheels instead of feet. At night, I lay in bed, muscles screaming, wondering if this was progress or punishment, if my body could ever feel like mine again. But there was more to the center than therapy. There were group sessions, circles of patients at different points in this endless climb. Some had been here before, veterans who returned for tune-ups, their confidence a strange kind of beacon. Others were brand new like me, still carrying the raw shock of fresh injury in their eyes. That was where I met Tara. She was a few years older, injured in a car accident 2 years earlier. She used leg braces and forearm crutches to walk short distances, though she mostly relied on her wheelchair. She carried herself with the ease of someone who had made peace with the fight, even if the scars were still visible. One evening during dinner hour, as trays clattered and the smell of institutional food filled the room, Tara leaned across the table to me. "It gets easier," she said simply. Her voice wasn't falsely cheerful. It carried the weight of someone who had lived through the dark nights and still found a way forward. "Not the physical stuff necessarily, though yeah, some of that improves with time. But the part where you stop feeling like you've lost yourself? That's the part that changes." Her words hit me in a way nothing else had, not like a pep talk, but like a lantern being passed from one weary traveler to another. And for the first time, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to keep moving too. Tara's words echoed in my head long after that dinner. Eventually it becomes just one aspect of who you are, not your entire identity. In my darkest moments, when the future stretched out like a black void, that single sentence was a lifeline. There were days when I felt almost human again, like the first time David fitted me with braces and helped me stand between the parallel bars, sweat dripping down my temples as I clenched every muscle that still answered. Or the afternoon I felt the faintest flicker in my toes, so slight I thought I had imagined it, until David grinned and said, "That's real." But progress was never a straight line. Infections crept in, setting me back for weeks. Despair whispered at night, reminding me of everything I had lost. I learned quickly that recovery wasn't triumph. It was endurance. During all of this, silence from my family stretched longer and heavier. My attorney explained they'd been instructed not to contact me while the cases were pending, but deep down I knew it wasn't just legal advice. It was who they were. Part of me was relieved not to hear their voices twisting the story, but another part ached with that familiar sting of abandonment. Into that void, my friends and colleagues stepped. The teachers from my elementary school organized visits, bringing laughter and gossip from the staff room, homemade casseroles that smelled like comfort compared to hospital trays, and a GoFundMe that stunned me with generosity. People I had taught beside, parents of my students. They carried me in ways my own blood never had. 3 months after the fall, the legal storm finally reached resolution. Dylan took a plea deal, admitting to felony, reckless endangerment. 5 years, with 2 behind bars and 3 on probation. My parents pled out too: probation, 400 hours of community service each, and mandatory counseling. It wasn't the full weight of justice, but it was accountability in a way I'd never thought possible. The civil case dragged on longer. Michael deposed each of them, forcing them to sit under oath and recount the day my life shattered. He told me later how their voices wavered, how their faces shifted when the lies could no longer hold. 6 months in, we reached a settlement. Their homeowner's insurance maxed out at $1 million. On top of that, my parents agreed to sell their house and carve away at their retirement savings to create a trust of $2 million more. It was surreal, knowing the home that had suffocated me would now fund the life I had no choice but to build outside of it. $3 million. Enough to cover medical bills, wheelchair upgrades, home modifications, a cushion for the future I still couldn't picture. But no check could buy back what I lost. Money didn't return sensation to my legs or erase the trauma carved into my body. By the 8-month mark, my doctor said I was making remarkable progress. With braces locked around my legs and a walker clenched in my hands, I could shuffle forward, a handful of labored steps at a time. It wasn't walking, not the thoughtless grace I once had, but it was something, more than many people with my injury ever regained. And so I left inpatient rehab, outpatient therapy scheduled 3 times a week, a life I hadn't chosen waiting on the other side of those hospital doors. Moving back into my apartment felt both like a homecoming and a reminder of everything that had changed. The ramps, the widened doorways, the accessible bathroom, each adaptation was proof that my life was now divided into before and after. A part-time caregiver came in to help with the tasks my body still refused to manage, and I tried to accept that support with grace, though inside it often felt like surrender. Professionally, I reimagined myself. Teaching in a classroom full of children who ran, skipped, and tugged at my sleeve no longer seemed possible. The school district offered me a position as a curriculum specialist, work I could do largely from home with only occasional visits to schools. It wasn't the same as standing in front of my students, but it was still purpose, still connection, and I clung to that. But the bigger work, the harder work, wasn't physical at all. I started sessions with Claire, a therapist who specialized in trauma and family dynamics. Sitting across from her, hearing her words, sometimes felt like she was peeling back layers I had spent years plastering over. "What happened to you wasn't just a physical injury," she told me gently during one session. "It was the culmination of a lifetime of emotional abuse and neglect. The paralysis in your legs is visible, but there are other invisible wounds that need healing too." Her words lodged deep. With her help, I started naming the things I'd always known, but never dared say out loud. The constant invalidation, the golden child and scapegoat dynamic, the way my parents worshipped appearances while letting me bleed inside. "Your family failed you in the most fundamental way," Claire said once, her voice steady but compassionate. "They had one job, to protect and care for you. Instead, they caused harm and then refused to acknowledge it. Hearing it framed so plainly hurt like a knife at first, but then it freed me. It gave me permission to stop twisting myself into knots for their love. I realized that in some cruel, twisted way, the injury had freed me from the family system that had kept me small and silent all my life." One day, Claire asked if I thought reconciliation was possible. I sat with that question a long time. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me thinks there's no coming back from this. Another part wonders if these consequences might finally force them to face the truth." She nodded. "Either way, Hannah, your healing does not depend on them. It's something you do for yourself." So I began, slowly and painfully, to do exactly that. To heal. Not just my body, but my sense of self, my definition of family, of love, of what I deserved. And then, as the 1-year anniversary of the fall crept closer, an envelope arrived in the mail. My stomach clenched when I saw the return address, the state correctional facility where Dylan was serving his sentence. I left it on the table for 3 days, unable to touch it, as if the paper itself might burn me. When I finally opened it, I found pages of handwritten words, shaky but deliberate. An apology, the first real one I had ever received from my brother. He wrote about the therapy he was doing inside, how he was finally confronting the cruelty of the person he'd been, the damage he'd inflicted. He offered no excuses, asked for nothing, not even forgiveness. "I understand if you never want to hear from me again," the letter ended. "I wouldn't blame you." Jason's letter ended with words I had longed to hear since childhood. "I am truly sorry for the pain I caused you, not just that day but throughout our lives. You deserved so much better." Reading them left me hollow and conflicted. Part of me wanted to crumple the pages, to reject his apology as too little, too late. Another part felt a flicker of something close to relief. After years of being silenced, I finally had acknowledgement, written in his own hand, that what I endured had been real. I wasn't ready to let him back into my life, and maybe I never would be. But in a strange way, the letter closed a door I had been banging against for decades. My parents, on the other hand, stayed silent. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they had sold the house I once called home, fled the stares and whispers of our community, and moved to Florida to start over in a smaller place with what remained after the settlement. They never reached out, not a phone call, not a note, and that silence, while painful, also confirmed what Claire had told me in therapy. Reconciliation or not, my healing couldn't depend on them. So I built something new. It wasn't the life I had planned, and it came with challenges I still cursed under my breath every single day. But it also held unexpected gifts. The friends who rotated through my hospital room became my chosen family, filling the void my blood relatives never could. The disability advocacy community I joined gave me purpose, connection, and the kind of belonging I had always craved but never found at home. And slowly, through countless tears and small victories, I discovered a resilience in myself I hadn't known existed, a capacity not just to survive, but to grow, to shape meaning out of pain. Now, 2 years have passed since that afternoon in Dylan's backyard. 2 years since a cruel prank and a family's indifference shattered the body I once trusted. 2 years of surgeries, braces, grueling rehab, and nights of grief so heavy I thought they would bury me. But also 2 years of learning, rebuilding, and reclaiming a voice I never thought I'd have. My life is not what I imagined it would be at 28, but it is still mine. And maybe, just maybe, that is its own form of justice. My life today hardly resembles the one I had before that fall. I live in a new apartment now, a ground-floor unit, in a building built with full accessibility in mind. Ramps, wide doorways, a roll-in shower. I drive again, too, in a car modified with hand controls, something I never thought I'd do when I first lay staring at the hospital ceiling, wondering if independence was gone forever. Work looks different, but it still fulfills me. Most days I log in remotely, shaping curriculum from behind my desk, but a few times each month I roll or walk, braces clicking, crutches steady, to schools where I train teachers on the materials I help design. It's not the same as standing before my own classroom, but it keeps me connected to education, to children, to purpose. Physically, the progress has been nothing short of remarkable, or so my doctors tell me. With braces and forearm crutches, I can walk short distances, slow and deliberate, though I still use a wheelchair for most of my daily mobility. Sensation has crept back into about 60% of my lower body. It isn't normal. It arrives as pins and needles, hypersensitivity, or odd jolts that remind me my nerves are still figuring things out. Some days I move almost easily, catch myself forgetting for a moment the limitations of my body. Other days, spasms, pain, or infections slam me back into the truth of this new reality. But the deepest healing hasn't been physical. It's been learning to see myself not just as someone broken by what happened, but as someone who reshaped herself through it. 6 months ago, I joined a local advocacy group for spinal cord injury survivors. Twice a week, I go back to the same rehab center where I once sweated and cried, learning how to transfer from bed to chair, how to cook without standing, how to rebuild a life I didn't ask for. Only now I'm not the patient. I'm a peer mentor. I sit across from men and women with eyes still raw from the shock of injury. People who whisper the same questions I once did. Will life ever be worth living again? And I tell them the truth. It will never be the same, but that doesn't mean it can't be good, rich, and full of meaning. 2 years ago, I thought my story had ended on a slick pool deck, written by cruelty and indifference. But here I am, telling it myself. My body is scarred, my family fractured, my life remade in ways I never would have chosen. And yet, I am still here, stronger in some ways, softer in others, resilient, scarred, alive. If you're listening to this and you've ever been dismissed, silenced, or told your pain wasn't real, know this: you are not alone, and your story isn't over either. When new patients at the rehab center look at me with hollow eyes, I echo what Tara once told me in that cafeteria 2 years ago. It doesn't get easier, I say softly, but you get stronger. And you find new ways to define what matters. I didn't believe her at the time, but now I know it's true. The strength doesn't come all at once. It comes in fragments, in the quiet moments you keep showing up for yourself, when everything in you wants to quit. Through this work, I met Thomas, a physical therapist who specialized in neurological injuries. At first, he was just another professional on my team, teaching me strategies, adjusting my braces, reminding me to breathe through the pain. But slowly, almost without my noticing, those professional interactions grew into late-night conversations, inside jokes, and eventually something more tender. For the first time in my life, I feel what healthy love is supposed to feel like, rooted in mutual respect, not control or appearances. He doesn't see me as broken or inspirational. He just sees me, all of me, including the parts I once tried to hide. With him, I am learning that love can be steady, kind, and safe. As for my family, that chapter is still complicated. Dylan was released from prison 4 months ago after serving his full sentence. He wrote to me again, asking if I might meet with him when I feel ready. I haven't decided yet. I may never decide. My parents remain in Florida, where I hear they've reinvented themselves with a new story for their neighbors, casting themselves as devoted parents who stood by their daughter after a tragic accident. Their truth is as curated as it has always been, polished to protect their image. But the difference now is that their narrative no longer has power over me. I know my truth. I don't need their acknowledgement to make it real. And that perhaps has been the most profound lesson of all. I grew up doubting my own experience, questioning whether my pain was valid, wondering if I was too sensitive or too dramatic. Now I know that validation doesn't come from the people who dismiss you. It has to come from within. Along the way, I've also discovered the true meaning of family. It isn't just bloodlines or last names. It's who shows up when you are broken, who sits with you when the world falls apart, who doesn't look away from your pain. My chosen family has grown to include Sarah, the paramedic who refused to let me be ignored; Rachel, the nurse whose voice cut through denial; David, the therapist who taught me what resilience looks like in motion; Claire, who helped me untangle the mess inside my heart; and now Thomas, who loves me with full acknowledgement of my scars. Last month, I crossed a finish line I never thought I'd reach. I completed my master's degree in educational psychology, specializing in trauma-informed teaching practices. This fall, I'll begin a new role as a consultant for the school district, training educators to recognize and support children living through the kinds of invisible wounds I know too well. It feels like the most honest way to honor what I've been through, by turning my pain into purpose, and maybe that is the ultimate healing, not erasing the scar, but transforming it into something that can light the way for someone else. My paralysis will always be part of my story, just as the family dynamics that shaped me will always linger in the background. But neither of those things defines the entirety of who I am or what my life can mean. Sometimes, when I'm sitting with Thomas or surrounded by friends who make me laugh until my stomach hurts, I catch myself in the middle of it, happy. Not happy despite what happened, but happy in a way that absorbs it, folds it into a larger narrative of resilience and growth. Of course, there are nights when pain keeps me awake, when grief presses so heavy on my chest, I wonder if I'll ever breathe easily again. I still mourn the abilities I lost, the toxic family bonds that, however harmful, had been my foundation for 28 years. I grieve the simple sense of safety in the world that was ripped from me that day on the pool deck and may never fully return. But even in those moments, I am no longer alone. I've learned to reach out, to let myself be vulnerable with the people who have earned that trust. I accept help without shame. I acknowledge my limits without letting them define me. If trauma has taught me anything, it is that our wounds shape us, but they don't have to determine us. Even the deepest betrayals can become catalysts for transformation. Sometimes it takes being broken to discover the strength we never knew we had. My doctors remind me that there may still be small gains ahead, nerves waking, muscles remembering, progress that can continue for up to 5 years. Maybe I'll walk more easily someday. Maybe I won't. Either way, I will keep building a life that stretches beyond limitation, that proves to me every day what is still possible. What I do know with absolute clarity is this: I am no longer the woman who stepped into that birthday party 2 years ago, desperate for approval from people incapable of truly seeing me. That Hannah is gone. What remains is someone new, someone forged in fire and recovery, stronger in the broken places, more authentic, more compassionate, more aware of both my vulnerability and my power. And perhaps that is the greatest, most unexpected gift this ordeal has given me: the discovery of a self worth fighting for, worth believing, worth loving.